Breaking down the vape debate. Originally seen as a safe alternative to tobacco, new research suggests vaping could be equally toxic. As some lawmakers attempt to drive smoking into extinction, could we see a bigger black market flourish off new legislation, or an end to smoking culture altogether? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's Newsmaker is vaping versus smoking. In April, the lower house of the British Parliament approved a historic plan to create a smoke-free generation. Under the bill, those who were born in or after 2009 will never be able to legally buy cigarettes. It also plans to increase the legal age limit for buying them by 1 year every year, beginning in 2027, until it applies to the entire population. The government will also invest £30 million in law enforcement to safeguard the regulations and crack down on the black market. Official figures say smoking is responsible for 64,000 deaths in England every year and 1 in 4 cancer deaths. The government believes the new laws could prevent almost 500,000 cases of strokes, heart disease, and lung cancer over the next 75 years, saving the NHS billions of dollars.
It will not affect current smokers' rights or entitlements in any way. And indeed, we want to help them to quit. We are supporting them by almost doubling the funding for local stop smoking services. But instead, this bill is looking to the future to give the next generation the freedom to live longer, healthier, more productive lives.
Well, the bill also includes a ban on cheap single-use vapes by early 2025 to protect children. Like many other countries, the rate of vaping among minors has been increasing in the UK, and research shows it's now more than double the smoking rate among kids. The government wants to put an end to these colorful scenes at vape shops by implementing the use of plain packaging. It will also restrict flavors to make them less attractive to young people. By doing that, the UK joins several other nations, including Belgium, New Zealand, and Australia, in limiting vape sales. But earlier this year, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said the government will continue to encourage the use of vaping for adults trying to quit tobacco. A recent European study backs the argument that vaping is more effective than other methods to stop smoking.
So people who were given free e-cigarettes and e-liquid were almost twice as likely to quit smoking for at least 6 months than those who received usual care. The study also assessed the safety of using e-cigarettes to quit, finding no difference in the rate of serious adverse events or respiratory symptoms between groups.
Well, despite the CDC and the NHS stating that e-cigarettes are safer than regular ones, they are by no means harmless. But measuring their impact on our health is not easy, as there are thousands of vaping products and many flavors containing thousands of chemical substances. A recent article published in Scientific Reports has used artificial intelligence to analyze 180 vape flavors. Now, the study has found that these vapes produce 127 acutely toxic chemicals, 153 health hazards, and over 200 irritants. And this is the conclusion the research team from the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland.
Prolonged exposure to these chemicals makes it plausible that we are standing at the starting line of a new wave of chronic diseases that will only emerge in 15 to 20 years from now. Without comprehensive regulation, as we try to treat the nicotine addictions of older tobacco smokers, there is a substantial risk of transferring new health issues to younger generations.
So are we on the precipice of a new health crisis, or is vaping truly a better option than tobacco? And can any or all of this be legislated to protect children and phase out smoking altogether? Well, joining me now to debate that and more are, from San Francisco, former American Legacy Foundation Distinguished Professor of Tobacco Control at UCSF, Stanton Glantz. From Edinburgh, the Chief Executive of Ash Scotland, Sheila Duffy. And from Vienna, the Deputy Director of the Consumer Choice Center, Yael Osowski. Thanks all so much for being with me. Sheila, I'll start with you because you are in the UK, and the government's goal is to phase out smoking entirely. Right now, they see vaping as the best alternative to tobacco to help adults quit. That's just a few of the things they're doing. Do you think they're on the right track?
When you say they see vaping as an alternative to tobacco, you're talking about England. And there are 4 nations in the UK. Scotland doesn't take that approach. We only recommend evidence-based, medicinally licensed products to help smokers quit. But yes, we're all 4 nations working to put smoking completely out of sight, out of mind, and out of fashion for the generation growing up.
Okay, so explain then, what's England doing that's not really working for Scotland? Why isn't it the approach all of you are taking?
So there is 4 nations legislation. It proposes to progressively raise the age of sale at which children may be sold tobacco and to put restrictions on e-cigarettes because everyone has an issue with youth uptake, massive rises in children using them. However, England actually advocates e-cigarettes for cessation and has a swap to stop scheme where it will give out starter kits. Scotland absolutely does not agree with that. We stick with the WHO recommendation, which is that vaping may help a tiny minority of smokers transition away from tobacco, which is welcome, but it's not a whole population approach and it should not be advertised as such.
It is interesting that the UK has approved vaping as a way of quitting. When the WHO itself has not, or sorry, England, when the WHO has not. How does that work? What is the WHO against that England sees is fit?
The WHO is not against. The WHO is looking at the science and it is saying there is not enough known about these devices. We know enough to be really concerned, but we don't have a full picture. So you cannot compare tobacco and e-cigarettes because we've had 100 years of research on tobacco. We know it's addictive, it's lethal, there's no safe level of use. When used as the manufacturers intend, it will reliably kill between half and 2/3 of its long-term consumers. But e-cigarettes haven't been around that long. They have been really used only for 15 years or so, and you cannot hope to see the full picture from that. So with tobacco, with asbestos, it takes 30 to 60 years to actually see the full health profile. And if you look at the research that's often quoted in England, it's looking at up to 2 years of health impacts, and that doesn't tell you enough. So Scotland, Ireland, and Wales take a more cautious approach, and we say, you know, this is not something at this stage we should be recommending. And e-cigarettes aren't one device. They're, you know, about 4 or 5 generations and 30 to 40,000 liquids in the UK. And you can't say one thing that applies to all of them. And there is none, not in the UK, not in Europe, not anywhere in the world that is licensed positively for medication for quitting smoking.
And Stanton Glantz, let me turn to you because that really is key. The research we have, in fact, the research we cited in the intro to this program is based on AI models because we don't have the longevity of, you know, vaping culture to actually do the research with. It just hasn't been around long enough. Do you worry about that?
Well, actually, I don't think that's correct. We published a paper in NEJM Evidence about 2 months ago where we found 107 large, high-quality population studies of the association between e-cigarette use and disease. And what we found was that for heart disease, for stroke, for metabolic disease, e-cigarettes are about as dangerous as cigarettes as actually used. And the statement that Ms. Duffy made and that you made, that it takes 40 to 50 years to see the effects of tobacco use and e-cigarette use is just wrong. The risks to your cardiovascular system, your lungs, start to appear actually within minutes. And we also found that for lung disease and oral diseases, things like periodontal or gum disease, e-cigarettes aren't quite as bad as cigarettes, but they're almost as bad as cigarettes.
Okay, so Professor Glantz, why this massive discrepancy? Why do you have a government like the one in England saying that e-cigarettes are a safe and better alternative? They've actually said that it's 95%. You know, better. Am I wrong, Sheila? Are we getting? I mean, we're hearing so many numbers now being thrown out there.
You're absolutely right.
The 95% number is just a made-up number. The origin of that was a group of about a dozen people who were brought together about 10 or 12 years ago, many of whom had financial connections to e-cigarette interests. And they just simply decided they were 95% safer.
Then why is the government going by that?
Well, I think that
Scotland
they're just
isn't.
simply, I think that the English government just decided that these were better based on no meaningful evidence, and they've just ignored everything that we've learned since then. There's about 10,000 scientific papers on the health effects of e-cigarettes now, and the more we learn, the worse they look. The e-cigarettes expose users to thousands of chemicals, and many of them are different than what cigarettes expose them to. But the bottom line is, do they cause disease? And, most people, including me, up until recently thought what Ms. Duffy said, that it's just too early to tell. But it
Okay.
turns out there's quite a substantial literature out there showing very, very serious effects. The one thing we don't have figured out yet is cancer, because that does take a long time. But cancer only kills about a third of the smokers, and the cardiovascular pulmonary effects are really, really bad.
Okay. Yael, I will come to you in just one second, but Sheila, first, talk about that 95% number that the English government is citing and why you have an issue with it. Why are they using it?
Yeah, Scotland's had a round table to look at our consensus position. We considered and utterly rejected the 95%. It's not founded on evidence. It was a speculative guess, as Stanton Glantz said, by a group of people in the very early days of e-cigarettes. And it is not founded on anything like what we're seeing now. And I would say, I'm not saying that e-cigarettes aren't harmful and we can't see harms now. I'm saying we haven't seen the full picture, and we know enough to be concerned. The WHO said they emit carcinogens. There's conclusive evidence they emit particulate matter, and air quality research tells us that's going to cause longer term health problems. So just because we haven't seen all the health issues now, and as Professor Glantz pointed out, we have started to see some really worrying signals. I think it's wrong to be enthusiastic about promoting these devices, because the damage will be done before we fully know what that damage consists.
Okay. Yael, let's flip to the other side of this argument, which is at least partially where you're at. What do you make of what you just heard in this exchange so far?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different issues. I think we're all trying to focus on how do we allow people to have a better lifestyle, to live longer, to make healthier choices. And we have alternatives that exist. I know we can debate studies. We can talk about the various ones that have come out. We can discuss whether they're long-term or short-term, whether they're population level. Realistically, there are 5 million people in the United Kingdom today who use vaping devices and products. And they're doing that, and they're moving away from using traditional combustible cigarettes, which we should praise. And having nicotine alternatives, having the ability to stop actually smoking, lighting paper and tobacco leaves on fire and ingesting them should be something that is celebrated up and down. This is more of a technological debate. There are new devices, there are new technologies, there are things like pouches, like gums, there are lozenges that we can have as well. There are alternative ways, and I think the debate should be around nicotine. It's not only just about smoking versus vaping. If we look at Sweden, they have a smoking level that is the lowest in Europe, and that's not because people are vaping en masse, but actually people are using products like snus, and they have an exception in the European Union, and it is banned there. So I think we should be looking at this more from a technological perspective and allowing people to make that choice. The UK tobacco and vapes bill, there's a lot of different things you can say about it, and there have been a lot of arguments. I won't rehash any of them there. I see this more as a political kind of ploy by Rishi Sunak and the Conservative government. There's a lot of issues there. He's not really on his own solid footing right now. So I do think it is a sort of last-ditch effort, because it's not necessarily a conservative position that we've had with this government. So I would like to see a lot more debate on that.
Okay, but let me ask Sheila, because you shook your head when you heard the mention of snus being used as kind of another alternative in Sweden. And there's also another element here that's very important, especially in the context of the UK, with a massive public health system, that you're looking at taxpayers having to fund, the health issues, pay for the hospitalization and the treatment of people who choose to do something that they know is bad for them. Go ahead.
This should not be a debate that suggests that people have chosen tobacco as an addiction, because most smokers start way under the legal age where they can be sold tobacco in the UK, which is 18. And by the time that they get to regret that, they're already addicted. And 2/3 of smokers in Scotland year on year say, we wish we weren't smokers, we wish we could quit. Now, I've spoken with colleagues in Sweden, and what they say is it's the tobacco control measures that have brought down the rates of smoking, not snus. Snus is traditionally used, but it's just another form of product and device by the same kind of industry that's profiting out of people's addiction and people's harm. And when you talk about e-cigarettes as a route out of tobacco, I welcome anyone who finds a route out of tobacco, but we shouldn't park them on another health-harming alternative device that makes profits for big industry. We should be looking to help them get clear. And in the UK and in Scotland, there's been an exponential rise in children and young people vaping. We've seen a doubling in regular use by 13-year-olds and a trebling in regular use by 15-year-olds. And that was 2022 figures, and recent data suggests it's still gone up. The industry is absolutely opening up a new market for addiction, and it is the industry we need to be holding accountable, not the consumers who are, leaned on with promotions and with the visibility and attractiveness of these products to take them up before they properly know what they're getting into.
Yeah, what's wrong with that argument, in your opinion, as what you say as a consumer freedom of choice advocate?
Well, I would say definitely we have to look to consumers and individuals, because they're the ones who will be making the choice. I know that there's a lot of talk about nicotine addiction, and it is an issue. It is a problem. It is something that, again, we have new devices that we can actually solve that with that do not kill us immediately. And that is not celebrated enough, I find. And this is not something that was developed in a government bureau. This is something that was developed by entrepreneurs. There's a lot of hate for industry, for free markets that allow us to have these tools, but these are where the solutions are going to come. Even Michael Bloomberg, who puts a lot of money into this debate, and in this room and many others, also is putting lots of money into figure out ways to deliver nicotine in a pharmaceutical way that would be retrograde, that would be regulated. Everyone understands, and even all of the different smoking cessation groups understand, that nicotine has a role in getting people off of smoking traditional combustion cigarettes. It's just in figuring out the least harmful way we can do that. That's all that we want, is just to have those options available, and do not make it more difficult. Because if we don't like the numbers of people who are vaping now, I can only imagine what they'll be once we have a blanket prohibition and then things are fully on the black market, fully illicit, and we'll see what happens then.
Professor Glantz, is that an argument there, that the black market can come in and fill the void, and then no one will even be better off?
Well, this whole black market argument, I mean, that's just standard tobacco industry rhetoric. And your viewers need to know that the Consumer Choice Network is funded by the tobacco industry. So it's just an industry front group. The one thing I want to take on, though, is this argument that e-cigarettes help smokers quit. And while there are some small randomized trials showing that e-cigarettes used in a clinical environment increase people stopping smoking a little bit, there's actually a much larger number of studies of what actually happens out in the real world, the kind of thing that your video is showing right now. And what the real world studies show is that e-cigarettes actually keep people smoking. They don't help them quit. And I mean, I think what the government in England is doing is just the height of irresponsibility, because we know that when you give people free e-cigarettes, which is what they're talking about doing in England, it's true, a few of them stop smoking cigarettes, but you're just switching them over to something that's almost as dangerous. And more important than that, for every person who stops smoking cigarettes, about 3 people become what are called dual users. That is, they use the e-cigarettes and cigarettes at the same time. And dual use is actually worse than smoking. So what's
Okay.
going on in England right now is actually the government is actually going to be increasing the amount of tobacco-related disease through their misguided policies. And why they ignore this huge body of scientific evidence that's become available in the last few years is just beyond me.
Professor Glantz, quickly, do you think there's a good chance that in hindsight we will see the promotion of vaping kind of today in England the way we now see the promotion of smoking tobacco back in the 50s and 60s, when they actually said tobacco was healthy and it contained calcium and that there were good cigarettes that were good for your health?
Yeah, the answer is yes.
Okay.
I think that when people look back at what's gone on in England in the last few years about e-cigarettes and these other new products, it's just going to be viewed as a huge mistake, where the government ended up basically helping the tobacco companies kill a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't want to say you're smirking, but you know, I can see you don't buy this. Why? Why don't you think e-cigarettes could prove to be as evil as the tobacco industry is today? And if we can nip it in the bud, why don't we do that?
Yeah, I think there's just been this conflation when we discuss industry. I mean, the entire vaping world, and these are people that you meet, and I've traveled to many different vape shops, I've gone to many different conventions. These are people who are passionate about a product that they found that helped them quit smoking. And they have open tank systems like you can see on the screen here. They're not affiliated at all with any tobacco companies. They actually hate the tobacco industry vape products. They like their independent devices that they're able to build themselves. And people are passionate about this, and they get people to actually quit smoking doing that. There's a gentleman in Michigan that I met recently who's owned a vape shop in Michigan. He had been doing it for years. He was passionate. He had helped 20,000 people quit smoking to go to vaping right away. Because of the flavor vaping regulations in Michigan, he's having to close his store. So how many more people could have been saved had he been allowed to sell those products? And now take that, multiply it by 50 states in the US and perhaps in the United Kingdom.
I think I know who you're talking about as well. He also defended the flavors because the U.S. Congress accused him of trying to appeal to children by marketing these fancy flavors. And he said, no, these are adults buying my products, and then they enjoy the flavors. That was at least his argument. It was an interesting case.
That's just ridiculous. I mean, to say adult smokers want Tutti Frutti or watermelon or SpongeBob SquarePants flavored e-cigarettes is just ridiculous.
They were fruity flavors, but they were selling. They were being marketed only. He was in his shop. I know the one in Michigan he's speaking about. It was only marketed to adults. Only adults could buy in that store. But I'll tell you what.
The vape shops are a tiny fraction of the market today. The big multinational tobacco companies have really completely taken, or not completely, but almost completely taken control of the e-cigarette market. And the other thing that's important for people to know, I mean, their e-cigarettes are presented as this innovative renegade product to compete with big tobacco. In fact, the big multinational tobacco companies had invented and had e-cigarettes back in the early 90s. They just didn't take them to market. And if you look at their internal research on why they developed e-cigarettes, it wasn't to help people quit smoking. It wasn't for harm reduction. It was to hold on to customers because health-concerned smokers were quitting, and they wanted to keep them.
Okay, let me just go to Sheila for one last point then, because you know what? Many would argue that people are going to smoke no matter what. They like the nicotine. They enjoy smoking. Millions of them do, even though many will say, like you argued, you know, that they started as children and they wish they could go back and quit now. But the bottom line is vaping, even if it's still not good, it might be marginally better. And let's be honest, with it, at least there is no secondary smoke. There's no odor associated with it. And for the wider population, it's a far less antisocial habit than tobacco. So it is better.
took us
Well, there is
years
second.
to...
Hold on,
Wait, there
let me
is
get
second.
let me get Sheila to finish quickly. Go
Okay.
ahead.
It took us years to argue the case for clean air spaces for tobacco smoke, and there is conclusive evidence of particulates in heated tobacco products and e-cigarettes. And I'm really surprised that the Consumer Choice Centre claims to be arguing for consumers to move away from tobacco when it opposed plain packs regulation at EU level, and it opposed tobacco endgame measures at UK level, and it set up the World Vapers Alliance. It's got money from at least 3 or 4 tobacco companies and unknown dark sources, shed loads of money, operates in the US and Canada and the EU. This is not a consumer network. This is AstroTurf. It's fake grassroots opinion funded by industry interests and out to hook in new consumers. And everyone I've spoken to who smokes doesn't want their kids to smoke.
We're going to run over time, but Yael, I can let you respond to that very quickly.
Absolutely. People believe in our narrative. We don't believe in ours. People support our group because they actually believe in what we do and think that we're very effective at it. And if I've gotten the scorn of both of you today, then I have done my job. I think consumers want alternatives and want to be free to choose those alternatives. And that is what we're hoping to achieve in the United Kingdom and everywhere else.
That will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all 3 of my panelists so much for being with us, our viewers for joining us, of course, as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.